Welcome to Copper Kettle Farms, located in historic Gettysburg, where we are constantly inundated with discussions about history, Civil War, and the North versus the South. As a proudly born Marylander, throughout the years I've dove into conversations about the inclusion of Maryland in the North versus South debate and seen arguments about how Maryland is not considered part of the South, despite being below the Mason-Dixon line and all the weird arguments that come with this false North versus South narrative in a country that obsessively loves the American flag, which of course is the flag of the Union, which is often vilified as the North. I always find it weird that this is even a topic of discussion, but having grown up on a farm of German immigrants in Baltimore, I always felt very attached to what is known as Southern or Appalachian or simply country culture growing up. I'm a sixth generation farmer, and although my style of farming and rural living is much different than what I remember growing up, those historical values and skills that were passed on to me remain the same regardless of how much time has passed over the years. That said, I decided to sit down and do my own research on the phenomena that is Maryland, on whether or not Maryland is part of the South. To understand Maryland's position, we have to look into some history. Not only was Maryland part of the first 13 colonies, but the Chesapeake region was the first region in the United States to establish slavery as an institution due to the major tributaries before it became such a strong issue in the South. Many of the people who were key figures in the abolitionist movement, such as Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, were slaves in Maryland. I only mention slavery as part of the argument because it's an obvious role in the Civil War, and the Civil War seems to be the point in our history that many modern enthusiasts of North versus South culture utilize in their logic. Maryland is also divided into several sections in and of itself for such a small state. To our western portion, we are greatly absorbed into Appalachian culture, which is considered inherently Southern by modern standards. It was settled by many English, Scots, Irish, Germans, and very few black slaves. To our southeastern side, we have the Tidewater region, which was developed around tobacco plantations and black slave labor. This portion of our state sympathized with the Confederates during the Civil War and practiced a form of Jim Crow segregation. It did not repeal its anti-miscegenation laws until 1967, just a few weeks before the Loving versus Virginia case about mixed marriages in Virginia. Where I grew up, which was more northern Maryland, is considered the Midland part of the state, which was filled with a lot of German immigrants who had farms without slaves. In fact, my great-great-grandfather, Anton Reisberg, was a German immigrant listed in the Germans to America's book in the 1860s that settled in Baltimore County to farm where my family grew up as farmers. No one in my family in that area had slaves, but they did have a lot of children. You could literally drive an hour across the state and be in a different kind of Maryland, which is kind of part of the charm of the modern version of Maryland. Now, if we were to look at what the U.S. Census Bureau views as Southern, which you can find in the U.S. Census website as well as Wikipedia, Maryland is the northernmost state in the Southern classification of our U.S. Census government categorization. So even the government considers Maryland part of the South. They state specifically, the South was defined as all states south of the 18th century Mason-Dixon line. Now, looking at the Mason-Dixon line, it was a demarcation line separating 4 U.S. states: Maryland, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and West Virginia. It was surveyed between 1763 and 1767 by Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon to basically resolve a border dispute between the states. The origins of this dispute are somewhat of a gray area, but is said to have something to do with some grants between King Charles I and Lord Baltimore, and then King Charles II and William Penn. Other sources say it was due to a land dispute between Charles Calvert and William Penn. So basically, some rich white guys had a land dispute and inherently created what is now considered the driving line between the North and the South. The longest part of the Mason-Dixon was informally the boundary between northern free states and southern slave states, somewhat 40 years before the Civil War, and the Civil War is when it became another demarcation of North versus South. The Maryland state song, "Maryland, My Maryland," was written during this time period. The song's lyrics urged Marylanders to spurn the northern scum and burst the tyrant's chain. In other words, secede from the Union. And oh, by the way, it's still the state song. Politically, in modern times, it is decidedly a blue state, but they currently have a Republican governor, so I feel like it could go either way. Food culture seems to be a big part of how people gauge northern and southern states anymore, as it would be the only demarcation that makes any bit of sense. Maryland certainly has its own culture of food between the legit obsession of steamed blue crabs, Old Bay, and Natty Boh, as well as scrapple and chippy. But the lines of food are so blurred anymore across the country because not only the ability to ship easily, but also the movement of people all over the country. You can get food from all sorts of locales, including Ethiopian restaurants in the United States, so food really isn't a defining factor. People try to, for some reason, delegate sweet tea availability as the indicator of North and South, but sweet tea is everywhere. The US is a very sugary country. So where does this leave Maryland? With such rich and mixed history, it's easy to see why people still can't quite wrap their head around whether Maryland is northern or southern. In truth, we're probably both, or more like 3 states all in one. With our roots in Appalachia, slave trade, tobacco farming, the Civil War history, and our modern delegates, it's hard to pinpoint Maryland as any one thing. It's also clear that the sprawl of Washington, D.C. and Baltimore that continues to grow, it's taken up many of the old country roots that Maryland was known for a time. That continues in every state though, with farmland decreasing and urban sprawls growing everywhere. We can't use urban versus rural as a classification in this particular argument because some of our bigger cities and airports are in what are considered southern states. If you look at Atlanta and Houston, for example. In 1956, a Tennessee woman wrote to the State Department of Information asking whether Maryland was a northern or southern state. The department told her to draw her own conclusion based off the following information, which was then reprinted in the Baltimore Sun at the time. Number 1, Maryland lies south of the Mason-Dixon line. Number 2, only 11 states in the country produce maple syrup. Maryland is the southernmost state that produces this product. Number 3, all southern states have cypress swamps. Maryland has the northernmost cypress swamp. Number 4, many northern and southern states produce tobacco. So does Maryland. Number 5, Virginia pine grows in most southern states, hemlock trees grow in most northern states, and Maryland produces both. The mockingbird is considered a southern bird. There are many in Maryland. Fried chicken is considered a southern delicacy, and Maryland fried chicken is world famous. During the war between the states, sometimes called the Civil War, Maryland had troops in both the Union and Confederate armies. Maryland's 175th Infantry is authorized to carry the Confederate flag. Maryland belongs to the Southern Governors Conference. Maryland belongs to the Northern and Southern Regional Park Conference. Maryland belongs to the federal government's Eastern Coastal Migratory Bird Flyway. At Gettysburg, there are monuments to the Maryland Regiment USA and the Maryland Regiment CSA. At Antietam Battlefield, sometimes called Sharpsburg, there is a monument to the memory of the men who died here for their convictions. The department added at the end, most Marylanders find it difficult to answer the question. Some consider themselves Southerners, others as Northerners. Perhaps the truth lives between the extremes. So in conclusion, the answer to the question of whether or not Maryland is in the South, I would say yes and no. I feel as a blood Marylander that we are in a very unique position to be either or, but certainly having roots in both, and opinions don't really change historical facts. Maryland is just Maryland. I will touch a little bit on an opinion regarding the North versus the South. I am a Marylander who lives in Pennsylvania. My husband is a Texan who moved to Pennsylvania. I appreciate the cultural diversity in our country, but I fly one flag. If I were to fly two, I would probably fly a state-related flag, but that American flag will always be the one flag. In the world that we live in 2021, where so many lines of division are being created, I prefer not to encourage further separation by instituting false segregation of pride, especially when we're all under that one flag. Be proud of your state, be proud of your soul food, be proud of your hardworking ethics and your manners, but understand that those things exist all over this country, and that country flies under one flag and one flag only. If you enjoyed my little bit of historical research, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and if you have any additional details that you would like to throw into the discussion, definitely leave a comment below, and I absolutely would love to hear your opinions and your research. Thanks again.